My name is Viktor Markov. I work at the Russian State Military Archive in Moscow. 6 years cataloging old Soviet files, pension forms, supply orders, paper nobody wanted and nobody missed. In January 2024, a shipment came in that I wish I had never touched. A steel document case, military green, about the size of a small suitcase, heavy, maybe 9 or 10 kilos. Welded shut, not locked, welded. Someone had taken a torch to the seam and closed it for good. The weld was old and brittle. Rust had crept in around the edges, and the green paint had bubbled up where the heat had been. I got it open with a flathead screwdriver and a little patience. The metal gave with a dry crack, and a thin line of black dust fell out onto the desk. Inside, a bound folder, about 300 pages, cloth cover, red string binding. The paper was thin and yellowed at the edges. Handwritten logs in blue fountain pen. Typed reports on onion skin carbon copies, the letters pressed deep into the sheet. Personnel files for 29 staff members, each with a small black and white photograph stapled to the corner. Medical intake papers for 3 test subjects. Neurological assessments. Status sheets listing all 29 as deceased. For 26 of them, the cause of death was the same 4 words, typed on the same Cyrillic typewriter. Catastrophic identity dissociation. I looked it up. It doesn't exist in any Soviet manual. It doesn't exist in any manual since. Someone invented those 4 words for this one case, because the words they had didn't fit what happened. And one more thing about those status sheets. Catastrophic identity dissociation isn't a medical diagnosis. It's a bureaucratic classification. The military paperwork marks all 29 as deceased, but nothing in the file confirms that any of them were biologically dead at the time the facility was sealed. That distinction matters. There were also facility plans folded into quarters, the folds worn through to small holes at the intersections, and 6 reel-to-reel tapes in individual metal cases, each case about the size of a dinner plate. Each one dated in pencil. Each one stamped in red with the classification mark. One of the tapes had an extra label, not typed. Red ink on white medical tape stuck to the lid. A human hand shaking. 3 words. Do not play. I read the documents first. All of them. It took me 2 weeks. What I read was a record of a Soviet experiment carried out between March and November of 1978. The site was called Index 4. It sat underneath the neurology wing of Kharkov National University Hospital. The project had a name too, the Kharkov Index. The money came from GRU Directorate S. The test subjects were 3 prisoners. The staff numbered 26. The goal was to see what the human brain could do if you took the brakes off. I've written down what the files say. All of it. I want someone to know what was done and why the case was welded shut, and why the last tape has those 3 words on the label. So here it is. The Kharkov Index. On paper, it was a sleep research annex for cosmonauts. That was the cover. It was built in 1969 underneath Kharkov National University Hospital. What it actually was, a 3-level lab belonging to GRU Directorate S, the science and technology arm of Soviet military intelligence. The layout was simple. You got in through a single service corridor from the hospital basement. No other way in, no other way out, no windows. Level 1 held the offices, the staff rooms, a small kitchen, and a single hardline phone to the ministry. Level 2 held the lab. 3 cells around a central monitoring station. Each cell was 3 meters by 4. White tile on the walls, gray grout between. A steel door with a small wired glass window. A cot with a gray wool blanket. A wooden chair. A metal table bolted to the floor. Level 3 held storage and the backup generator. The air was cold. The staff wore sweaters under their lab coats. Staff worked 2-week shifts and lived on site. The place could hold 35 people. It was designed for long, quiet, hidden work. The man in charge was Dr. Lev Mikhailovich Orlov, neurophysiologist, 51 years old in 1978. He had come from the Sechenov Institute in Moscow. He had published a great deal on how the brain changes itself. The question he couldn't stop thinking about was one he wrote down in his own notes, in his own hand, over and over. Why doesn't the brain use all of itself at once? It just uses different parts at different times. There's a limit, built in, that stops every part from firing together. Orlov compared it, in his own logs, to the limiter on an engine. The engine can spin faster. The limiter won't let it. What Orlov wanted to know was this: what happens if you pull the limiter? His answer was a compound. He called it S70. S70 started life as an epilepsy drug. The idea had been to strengthen the brain's brakes so seizures couldn't happen. A mistake in the synthesis reversed it. Instead of tightening the brakes, the new compound loosened them. It let sleeping paths wake up alongside the ones already working. It was, in the most literal sense, the exact opposite of what anyone had meant to make. Orlov saw what he had. He wrote to GRU. GRU wrote back with money. They wanted sharper officers, faster thinkers, better spies. He wanted something bigger than that, but he didn't argue. The money was the money. S70 went in through an IV drip. The dose set the level. In animal trials, the math held steady. 5 milligrams per kilo of body weight gave you about 10% extra activation above baseline. 15 milligrams gave you 30%. The ceiling in primates was 40%. Past that, the test animals went still, then dropped. 72 hours to death. Their brains couldn't hold the strain. Too much happening at once, not enough structure to carry it. Orlov's plan for the humans was step by step. 15% first, then 30%, then 45%, then 60%. He was going to push 20% past the primate ceiling. His argument, what kills a chimp might hold in a person. GRU read the plan and signed it. They also picked the subjects. 3 prisoners. Orlov kept a file on each. Subject 1 was Irina Dashkova, 37 years old, a mathematician. She had taught at Leningrad State University until the state decided her course material was too Western and took her job and then took her freedom. 12 years of corrective labor. When she heard the experiment was about the brain, she volunteered. Her consent form is in the file. Her handwriting was neat. No corrections. Subject 2 was Grigory Pavelko, 43, a Red Army sergeant. In 1968, during the Soviet move into Czechoslovakia, he had refused an order. The file doesn't say which order. It only says he wouldn't carry out a lawful directive during an active operation. He got 8 years in military prison. He didn't volunteer. Somebody signed him over. Orlov's notes describe him as quiet, disciplined, and physically very strong. Subject 3 was Nadia Volkova, 22, a student at Moscow State University. She had been arrested for handing out banned books, 5 years. She was the youngest person in the building by a long stretch. Her consent form is in the file too. She signed it and then wrote a note in the margin in small letters. If this helps anyone, it's worth it. Orlov's intake write-up for her is one short line: idealistic, cooperative, slight build, unremarkable cognitive baseline. The dosing began on the morning of March 14th, 1978. 3 IV drips. Stage 1, 15%. All 3 subjects sat on their cots in gray cotton hospital pajamas, left sleeves rolled up to the elbow. The drips were mounted on wheeled steel stands at the head of each cot. The compound was clear. It went in with saline. The drips went in at 8 o'clock sharp. The nurses taped the needles in place and stepped back. The monitors ran. Orlov stood at the central station on level 2 and watched the 3 small windows in the 3 steel doors. 3 paper EEG readouts came out of 3 machines in 3 steady lines. Nobody spoke. His first log entry after the drips went in is 4 short sentences. All subjects stable, awaiting observable response. Estimated onset, 4 to 6 hours. We begin. Orlov called it the climb. He used the word more than once in his own logs. A slow climb, a good climb, a climb in good weather. Stage 1 was 15%. For the first 48 hours, nothing much happened. The subjects slept a little. They ate. Nurses checked their pulses and their pupils and wrote numbers in columns, in pencil, in ruled notebooks kept on a steel trolley by the door. The file is thin for those 2 days. Then, somewhere in the second day, the numbers changed. They started with Irina, the mathematician. A nurse gave her a page of 60 random numbers and 30 seconds to look at it. Then the nurse took the page back and asked her to say them. Irina said all 60 in order. She said them again the next morning in her cell with no page in the room, unprompted. She told the nurse the numbers were still there, like a photograph. She said she could go and look at it whenever she wanted. Grigori was next, the sergeant. The wall between his cell and the monitoring station was poured concrete, 30 centimeters thick. On the 3rd morning, a staff meeting was held in that station. 6 people. The door shut. They talked for 20 minutes about dosing and scheduling. When the meeting broke up, a nurse walked past Grigori's cell and he called her by name through the door. Then he repeated, word for word, a sentence her supervisor had said in the meeting. Not the gist, the sentence. Pauses and all. Nadia started finishing people's sentences. Not the end of a word. The next thought. A doctor would ask her a question and, halfway through the question, she would already be answering the question the doctor meant to ask after. The staff found it charming for about a day. Then they found it harder to talk in front of her. She wasn't guessing. She was right every time. At 15%, they were still themselves. The file is clear about this. Irina joked with the nurses. Grigori did push-ups on the bare concrete floor of his cell, 200 at a stretch, every morning, counting them out loud in Russian. Nadia read every book they gave her and asked for more. She went through a stack of journals in 2 nights and came back asking, politely, for history. They were sharper. They weren't strange. Not yet. Orlov kept his personal log in a gray cloth-bound notebook, writing in blue ballpoint on the right-hand pages only. He wrote 1 line in it at the end of April. I want to be sure this holds before we go further. GRU didn't want to wait. They wanted stage 2 the next week. Orlov held the line and gave it 4 weeks. The data stayed clean. No side effects, no slip. On May 6th, the drips went in again. 3 saline bags on 3 steel stands, 3 plastic lines taped to the back of 3 hands. Stage 2 was 30%. This is where Orlov's tone in the file changes. You can see it on the page. The handwriting is the same, but the sentences get shorter. The pauses get longer. Within 24 hours, the subjects knew things. A guard walked past Grigori's cell, and Grigori spoke through the door and told him something about his younger brother. Something private. Something the guard had never told anyone in the facility. The guard went back to the station and sat down and didn't talk for a while. Later he told a colleague that Grigori hadn't asked and he hadn't told. Grigori's own words are in the log. I looked at you, he said, and the information was there. Irina asked for a newspaper. They gave her a 2-day-old Pravda, folded twice, the edges yellowing and the ink a little smudged at the fold. She read it for 10 minutes and then told Orlov the Soviet grain harvest was going to fail in August. She said it was in a small weather summary on page 4, 2 inches of print. She pointed to the column and said the pattern was obvious. The harvest failed in August. There's a note in Orlov's hand, added in September, on the bottom of that page. It just says, she was right. Nadia told her nurse to call her mother. She said, "You should call her, she isn't feeling well." The nurse went home at the end of her shift and called. Her mother had fallen in the kitchen that morning and hit her head on the counter. She was all right, but she had fallen. They watched the staff with a steady attention that didn't blink enough. Irina would look at a doctor and the doctor would lose his place in his own notes. Orlov's personal log from May 20th. At 15%, we were studying them. At 30%, I sometimes feel they're studying us. This morning, Irina looked at me during the evaluation, and I had the clear sense that she was choosing how much to show me. Around that time, Grigori asked to speak to Orlov alone. Orlov went to his cell and sat on the wooden chair by the door. It was a straight-backed chair with one leg a few millimeters shorter than the others, and it tipped when he leaned forward. Grigori sat on the cot. Steel frame, thin mattress, one gray wool blanket folded at the foot. The file has Orlov's notes from the conversation written up that same afternoon. Grigori said, "Doctor, you should stop at this stage. What you have given us is useful. It can be controlled. The next level will be different." Orlov asked him how he knew. Grigori said, "I can feel the next room. The door is closed, but I can feel the air coming through underneath. It's cold." That was it. He didn't say anything else. Orlov got up and walked out, and Grigori lay back on his cot and closed his eyes. Orlov wrote to GRU the next day, asking for an extended observation period. GRU wrote back in 3 lines. General Fedorov's name was on the bottom. "The program is delivering results beyond projection. Delay isn't justified. Proceed." And in the same letter, in the next paragraph, GRU ordered the lockdown. This is the part of the file where I had to stop reading for a while. No staff rotation, in or out, no 2-week shifts, no going home. The official reason was operational security during a critical phase. All 26 staff currently on site would remain for the duration of Stage 3 observation. Estimated 4 to 6 weeks. The service corridor to the hospital basement would stay open for supply deliveries only. Food in, paper in, nothing out, no people. Several staff protested. Their protests are in the file, stapled to the rejection notices. A nurse named Yelena had a 9-year-old daughter at home. She wrote that she had to go back. She was told no. An older doctor wrote that his wife was sick and needed him. He was told no. The older doctor wrote a second letter, more formal, citing his rights under a specific clause. That letter has a single stamp on it, in red ink, across the top margin. Denied. 26 people who had signed on for 2 weeks at a time were now locked in a 3-level underground building with 3 test subjects, and the test subjects were about to get another dose. Stage 3 went in on July 2nd, 45%, and then the subjects stopped talking, all 3 of them, at the same time. They still answered direct questions, flatly, shortly, facts only, but they didn't joke anymore. They didn't ask for books. Grigori didn't do his push-ups. They sat in their cells with their eyes open, staring at nothing for hours at a time. A nurse wrote in her report that Irina hadn't blinked in 4 minutes. She had timed it on her watch. When a staff member asked Irina if she was unwell, she said, "We aren't unwell. We're busy." Doing what? Listening. To what? The nurse wrote down that there was a pause here. Irina looked at her. Not unkindly. The nurse wrote that Irina was trying to find words that were simple enough. Irina said, "I don't have a word for it." She said it was like hearing a sound you've never heard before. Nadia had been quiet since the dosing. She hadn't said a word. A nurse wrote a short report about her and asked to be moved to a different post. I'm going to copy it here the way it's in the file. Volkova used to talk all the time. Now she sits facing the wall. I can't tell if she's breathing unless I watch her for 30 seconds. This morning I asked her if she was all right. She turned her head and looked at me. I don't know how to write down what that felt like. I'm requesting a different post. The monitoring station flagged something on the EEG. The machines printed the traces in real time on rolls of graph paper, 1 roll per subject, meters of it coiling into the wire basket by the desk. The 3 subjects' brainwaves were moving toward each other. Not identical yet. Getting there. The neurologist on staff called it unprecedented in writing and recommended halting the program. GRU said continue. A guard named Petrov wrote a short weekly report in the last week of July. He had worked in Index 4 for 3 months. He wrote that the subjects didn't feel like prisoners anymore. He wrote that he couldn't explain what they felt like instead. He asked for a transfer denied, lockdown. Orlov's personal log from July 28th is the last thing in the file before stage 4. He wrote it in the middle of the night. The handwriting is worse than the earlier entries. Tired, maybe, or something else. Grigori was right. This is different. At 30%, they were extraordinary humans. At 45%, I'm no longer sure the word applies. I sat with them for 2 hours this afternoon and came out of there and had to sit at my desk for a while before I could write anything down. They're waiting. And I think whatever they're waiting for is stage 4. Stage 4 starts on the next page. Orlov asked GRU for 2 more months at 45%. GRU gave him 6 weeks. The final dose went in on September 8th, 1978. 60%. Orlov wrote the time of administration in his log as 0814. Then he drew a small horizontal line across the page and started a new entry. For 72 hours, nothing happened that you could see. The subjects sat in their cells. They didn't eat. They didn't drink. They didn't ask for anything. They sat on the edges of their thin foam cots, and they looked at the painted concrete wall in front of them, and they didn't move. Vitals were stable on all 3. Heart rates slow and even. Blood pressure low but not dangerous. The EEG machines kept printing their rolls of graph paper into the wire basket by the desk, and the neurologist on duty pulled the rolls out and laid them side by side on the floor of the monitoring station, and then stood there for a long time, not saying anything, with his hands on his hips. All 3 waveforms were the same, not close, the same. 3 lines of ink that lay on top of each other like one line. The neurologist went and got Orlov. They stood over the paper together, and Orlov wrote in his log, later that day, that he had the thought then, for the first time, that maybe the compound had hit its ceiling, that maybe this was all that was going to happen. He wrote that he let himself hope. Hour 73. Irina opened her mouth and started to speak. It wasn't Russian. I've thought about how to describe this part. The file is careful with it. The sounds were made the way a human being makes sounds. The staff who heard it all wrote the same thing in their reports. The syllables folded into each other. The pitch would change in the middle of a single sound, high to low or low to high, in a way that the ear caught but the mind couldn't hold on to. The rhythm didn't match anything. An engineer named Sorokin was on shift in the monitoring station. He wrote his incident report later that evening in a plain hand. It sounded like a language you used to know, like something you spoke when you were very small and then forgot. I kept almost understanding it. The almost was the worst part. All 3 of them were speaking it, at once. Irina first, then Grigori, then Nadia, who hadn't said a word in 6 weeks. She opened her mouth and joined them as if she had been practicing. Different sounds from each of them, but they fit together. They didn't talk over each other. Orlov put on a pair of industrial ear defenders and went down to the cell. He could hear the voices through the defenders, muffled but present. He opened the door himself. He stood in front of Irina and he told her to speak Russian. She looked up at him. The file says every staff member who described her face in the weeks after this used the same word, without knowing the others had used it. They used the word pity. Irina spoke in Russian, slowly and carefully. She said, "We can still use the small language. It's difficult. It's like writing with your wrong hand." Orlov walked out of the cell and went up to level 1 and picked up the hardline telephone and called Moscow. GRU sent one man, Major Arkady Cheslov, a military linguist. He had spent 20 years in signals intelligence, listening to foreign radio traffic and trying to work out what people were saying. GRU broke the lockdown for him and for nobody else. He came down the service corridor from the hospital basement on September 11th at around 10 in the morning. He was the last person to walk into Index 4 from the outside. He didn't enter the cells. He went into the monitoring station on level 2 and sat at the desk and listened through the facility's speakers. The subjects were speaking in their cells. They didn't stop when he arrived. They didn't seem to notice him at all. He listened for 14 minutes. His written report was 3 lines. Here it is, exactly as it's in the file. The handwriting is shaky. You can see where the pen pushed a little too hard on some of the letters. This isn't a constructed language. The phoneme combinations produce an involuntary neurological response in the listener. I'm requesting immediate departure. I've had a headache since minute 6 that isn't responding to medication. Cheslov left Index 4 that same afternoon. After he went, GRU sealed the service corridor to all personnel movement, not to supply deliveries. Food and paper and medicine would still be lowered to the hospital end of the corridor, and the staff inside would still come and get it. But no person was to walk in or out of Index 4 from that day forward. The order was signed by General Fedorov. It's stapled to the inside cover of the second folder. Cheslov was transferred to a military psychiatric hospital in Moscow 11 days later. I found his intake report in a separate file. It's 2 pages long. The important part is short. The patient speaks fluently in a language the hospital staff aren't able to identify. He isn't always able to say his own name. He isn't always able to say his rank or his unit. When asked who he is, he sometimes answers in Russian and sometimes in the other language. The answers aren't the same. He was discharged from the military on medical grounds in 1979. His file ends there. 14 minutes of listening. That was enough. The subjects had a word for themselves in the new language. When the staff asked them to translate it into Russian, Grigory was the one who tried. The man who had refused an order in Czechoslovakia and spent 8 years in a military prison for it. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "Arrived. Not improved. Not changed. Arrived." As if the 15, the 30, the 45 had all been a road, and this was where the road went. After the first week, they ate again when food was put on the table in their cells. They didn't ask for it. They chewed and swallowed without looking at the plate. They didn't sleep. The nurses on the night shift watched them through the cell doors, and the subjects sat in the dark on the edges of their cots with their eyes open, and the nurses could see the eyes shining a little in the low light from the corridor. When they spoke Russian now, it was slow, careful. Orlov wrote in his log that it was like watching a grown man use a child's alphabet, printing each letter separately, not because they had forgotten, because it was small and fiddly and not worth hurrying. Irina said something to Orlov during an evaluation. It's in the file in her own words because Orlov wrote it down straight after. She said, "You built us a door, Doctor. We walked through it. But your language has 3 dimensions. What we need to describe has 11. I can flatten it down into Russian for you, but it wouldn't be the real thing." Orlov wrote underneath her words, in the same blue pen, 2 sentences. "I don't know if she's telling the truth. I don't know if it matters." First contact. And then, for a few days, things got better. The subjects made conversation in Russian. Small, easy conversation. They asked the nurses about their homes, their children, the weather outside. Grigory asked a young guard if his father was still alive. The guard said yes. Grigory said, "That's good. My father was a carpenter. He made chairs. I'm glad yours is still alive. 3 days. On the morning of September 15th, a nurse named Yelena Fyodorova came on shift at 7 o'clock on level 2. She was one of the nurses who had protested the lockdown in May, the one with the 9-year-old daughter. She had spoken to Grigori the afternoon before. They had talked for about 10 minutes. She had told another nurse it was a nice conversation. She said he had been kind. She sat down at the staff room table on level 1 at the start of her shift, still in her coat, and she started crying. Another nurse asked her what was wrong. Yelena didn't answer for a while. Then she said, "I remember being a soldier. I rode in Czechoslovakia in August, deciding not to follow an order. The weight of a rifle on my shoulder and the smell of diesel and the sound my boots made on gravel. These aren't my memories." She kept crying. She said, "I've never held a rifle, never been to Czechoslovakia. I don't know these things, but I know them, the way I know the name of my daughter." Within 48 hours, 3 more staff said the same thing. Each one of them had spoken with one of the subjects in the days before. Each one of them was now carrying a life that didn't belong to them, a childhood in a town they had never seen, a wife they had never met, the taste of a meal in a kitchen that wasn't theirs. The memories weren't foggy, they weren't feelings. They were detailed in order with smells and weights and small private embarrassments, and they felt as real as the real ones. Orlov locked himself in his office on level 1 with the intake files and the transcripts from the week and a pot of cold tea and worked through it. He found the pattern. A staff member would have a normal conversation with a subject in Russian. Nothing alarming, nothing strange. Then there was a gap of 12 to 20 hours. Then the memories started coming in. The Russian wasn't normal Russian. The words were the right words. The sentences were the right sentences. But underneath the sentences, underneath the cadence, underneath the way one idea moved to the next, the new language was still there, buried. The staff weren't hearing it with their ears. Their brains were catching it anyway. One conversation was the dose. The 12 to 20-hour gap was how long it took to settle in. By the time you knew something was wrong, it had been inside you for most of a day. He waited 2 days to see if his own mind would change. It didn't. Orlov figured out why. The secret pattern needed a smooth, natural flow to work. The notes he read from his staff were just messy summaries, so the rhythm was broken on the page. It was like reading the lyrics to a song instead of actually hearing the music. And his talks with the prisoners? The guards had long, relaxed chats with them. But Orlov was a scientist. He only asked short, strict questions. Stop and start. Yes or no. Because his conversations were so stiff and choppy, the dangerous pattern couldn't fit inside them. The boring, scientific way he talked had accidentally saved him. Orlov shut it down the same day. No more talking to the subjects. All contact through written notes slid under the cell doors. No one enters a cell without military ear defenders on. The heavy kind, rated for artillery. Green plastic shells with foam padding that smelled like sweat and gun oil. He put it all in a directive, pinned it to the wall of the level 1 staff room, and made every person still on their feet read it and sign it. For 3 days it held. Nobody spoke to the subjects. Nobody went near them without the ear defenders clamped tight over their skull. The subjects sat in their cells and didn't seem to mind. Then Irina wrote a note back. It came through under the door of her cell on a torn strip of lined paper, folded once. The handwriting was small and neat. A staff member picked it up. The note was in Russian, polite, a short request for a warmer blanket. The nights were cold on level 2, and the heating system had been unreliable since July. She was right about that. He read the note, set it on the desk in the monitoring station next to his tea, and went about his shift. 20 hours later, he was sitting on the floor of the level 1 corridor with his back against the wall, hands flat on the concrete beside him, palms down, fingers spread. eyes open but not focused on anything in the corridor. He was describing, in a low, steady voice, the layout of a house in Leningrad that he had never been to. The front hallway, a narrow kitchen with a window that looked out on an alley, the sound the radiator made in winter, a cat that slept on the sill, Irina's childhood home. He couldn't remember his mother's maiden name. Sat on that floor and tried for a long time, and it wouldn't come. But he could tell you the name of the cat. He could tell you what the alley smelled like in the rain. The structure carried in text. Not as fast, 20 to 30 hours instead of 12, and the effect came on slower, in pieces rather than all at once. But the result was the same. It didn't need sound at all. It needed a medium, and paper was a medium. The words on the page were normal Russian words in normal Russian grammar, and underneath the words, folded into the order and the rhythm and the way one idea sat next to another, the other thing was there. Orlov banned all contact. No speech, no notes, no gestures, nothing. It was too late for some of them. By the end of September, 9 staff members were what Orlov called converted. His word. He used it in his logs without quotation marks. The pattern was the same each time. Confusion first, crying, repeating things that didn't belong to them, memories they couldn't place, names, places. Then the confusion passed, and what came after was worse, because what came after was calm. They stopped being upset, stopped trying to fight it. Shoulders dropped, breathing slowed. Staff reports described the same expression every time. Pity, warm, steady, patient pity, the look of someone who feels sorry for you and can't find the words. Within 48 hours of onset, they were speaking the new language. Badly at first, like a child learning words that are too big for them. Then they stopped using Russian at all unless someone on level 1 spoke to them through the intercom. They carried dozens of memories, hundreds, a jumble. Their own childhoods mixed with Grigori's, Irina's lectures, Nadia's arrest on the steps of Moscow State. All of it at once, with no dividing line. They didn't seem troubled by this, didn't try to sort it, talked about it the way you talk about the weather. The cell doors opened. Orlov couldn't work out how. The locks were mechanical, operated from the monitoring station, and the keys were on level 1. But they still knew the facility. They had worked there. They knew the maintenance overrides and the bypass codes. The doors opened, and the subjects and the converted moved freely through levels 2 and 3. They gathered in the monitoring station or in the storage rooms. They sat in loose circles and spoke in the new language and moved together, standing at the same time, turning their heads together, not rehearsed, automatic. A guard on level 1 watched the security feed one morning. Black and white monitor, poor resolution, mounted on a bracket above the desk. The camera on level 2 showed the monitoring station. 21 people sitting in a circle on the floor, silent, still. Then, at the same instant, all 21 turned their heads and looked directly into the camera. They held the look for 30 seconds. Then they turned back to each other. The guard checked the time. 8 o'clock. His shift had started at 8 o'clock. They knew his schedule. They were saying hello. They did this every morning after that. Nadia. She was 22 when she signed her consent form. She wrote in the margin, "If this helps anyone, it's worth it." She was the youngest person in that facility by more than a decade. She came in idealistic and cooperative, and she read everything they handed her, and she asked for more. And then 45% hit, and she stopped talking for 6 weeks, and then 60% hit, and she was something else. Late September, she walked up to the intercom on level 2 and pressed her face close to the speaker grill. The intercom was still connected. Orlov was on level 1. She spoke in Russian. Slow and careful, the way all of them spoke Russian now. She said, "Lev Mikhailovich, you don't have to be afraid. Nadia's still here. She's just not alone anymore. There are thousands of us in here, thousands of lifetimes. It's worth it, Doctor. I meant what I wrote. It's worth it." She smiled. Orlov wrote that he could hear the smile in her voice even through the intercom static. He didn't answer. The count. By mid-October, Orlov was keeping a daily tally in the margin of his log. Converted, 21. The 3 subjects plus 18 staff. They had levels 2 and 3, remaining 8. Orlov plus 7 staff who hadn't spoken to a subject or a converted person or read a note from any of them. They held level 1. The 8 of them talked only to each other, only face to face, only in rooms where the intercom had been pulled from the wall. They ate from sealed rations, canned fish, dry biscuits, water from the tap on level 1, which tasted of iron. They took turns sleeping on the staff room floor. Someone was always watching the stairwell door. The converted didn't come up, didn't bang on the door, didn't shout or try to force anything. They sat on level 2, spoke their language, and waited. Orlov wrote, "The only thing between their condition and the outside world is a service corridor and 7 people who are running out of food." On the 22nd of October, he used the hardline telephone on level 1, a gray rotary unit bolted to the wall beside the stairwell door, the single line to the ministry. He called General Fedorov. The call isn't transcribed, but it's referenced in his final document. He reported everything: the language, the spread, the written vector, the numbers. Then he recommended full facility termination, not shutdown, not evacuation, physical seal, concrete, everyone inside, including himself. His reasons are in the file, 3 of them. Steady lettering, no corrections. 1. The effect transmits through speech and text. Any converted person who reaches the surface can spread it through a single conversation. In a city of over 1 million people, containment becomes impossible within days. 2. He and the remaining 7 have lived in the same sealed facility as the converted for weeks. He can't verify that they're clean. None of them can be allowed to leave. 3. He built this. The compound was his. The program was his proposal. The subjects were his responsibility. Fedorov approved it. A military engineering team would arrive within 48 hours to seal Index 4 from the hospital side. Cover story: structural collapse, gas leak, area condemned. Orlov had 48 hours. He spent the last night writing. Level 1, the staff room. A metal desk pushed against the wall, a single lamp with a shade that had gone yellow from the heat. The room smelled like old coffee and warm dust. He had a stack of blank paper on the left side and the growing document on the right. He wrote in blue ink, the same pen he had used since March, and his handwriting didn't change from the first page to the last. Small, level, evenly spaced. The handwriting of a man who has decided what he's going to do and no longer needs to think about it. He described everything: the compound, the stages, the language, the spread. He went back to the beginning and wrote it all out as if the person reading it had never heard of Index 4, had never heard of S70, knew nothing about what a human brain could become when you pulled the governors off and let it run. The 6 audio tapes went into separate cases. 5 of them were routine, his dictated observations, EEG audio feeds, ambient facility sounds, equipment noise. He had listened to them himself over the preceding months. Nothing on them that could hurt anyone. The 6th tape was different. 14 minutes of direct recording from the monitoring station microphones on the morning of September 11th. The subjects speaking the new language, the same sound that broke Major Cheslov in 14 minutes of live exposure. He sealed it in its own case, took a red pen from the desk drawer and wrote on the label in block capitals, "Do not play." He underlined it once. The ink bled slightly into the cardboard. He placed everything in the steel document case. Then he went down to level 3 for the last time, the maintenance workshop. He used the welding kit to seal the case shut. The The spark lit the room white, and the smell of burnt steel hung in the air for minutes after. He wrote later, "The knowledge of what happened here has to survive. The sound can't be heard. I'm sealing both together because anyone who reads the documents first will understand what the sixth tape is and why it's labeled the way it is. I have to believe that will be enough." At 4:30 in the morning, he carried the case up the service corridor to the hospital basement. The corridor was still open. The engineering team wouldn't arrive until 6. His footsteps echoed off the concrete walls. He set the case down at the hospital end, taped a written note to the lid. "Deliver to Ministry of Defense, Medical Directorate, Classified Archive, Storage Priority. Do not open." Then he walked back down the corridor into Index 4. Irina. She had been at the intercom most nights. He didn't answer. He never answered. But he could hear her through the floor, sometimes in Russian, sometimes in the other language, sometimes just a sound, continuous, like a conversation that never paused for breath. He sat at his desk on level 1 and listened to it through the concrete. On the last night, she spoke in Russian. He noted it in his final entry. He shouldn't have been listening. He knew that. But the intercom was on, and her voice was there, and he didn't turn it off for a long time. She talked about mathematics, structures she had found in the space between numbers, things she could see now that she couldn't have seen before March. She spoke slowly, testing each word before she committed to it. She said, "There's a value I've found, Lev Mikhailovich. I can't say it in Russian because it would take 11 years to pronounce, but it describes exactly how long a human thought takes to form. And it's wrong. Your thoughts are too slow. All of them. One small adjustment and everything changes. That's all it would take." He turned the intercom off after that. He wrote, "Not because I didn't understand her. Because I did." The 7 remaining staff were asleep in the eastern storage room on level 1. Blankets on the floor. Someone had left a tin mug by the door, half full of cold tea. He had told them a rescue team would reach the facility through an alternative access point. A second corridor. An emergency route built into the original plans. There was no second corridor. There was no emergency route. There was the service corridor, and there was concrete, and in less than 2 hours the concrete would be between them and the surface for good. Yevgeny Mironov was 24 years old. He had asked Orlov that morning if his mother would be told what happened. Orlov said yes. It was the worst lie he told in that facility. He could have told them. He thought about it. Not because they would have refused, because they would have agreed. And he couldn't carry that. Couldn't stand in a room and watch 7 people nod and accept what he was doing to them. The lie was easier. Not for them, for him. He knew the difference, and he wrote it down anyway. Final entry 0340 hours, October 24th, 1978. The concrete team arrives at 0600. They will seal the corridor from the hospital side. They won't enter the facility. They don't know what's inside. They've been told it's a chemical contamination. I've thought about going downstairs. Irina is at the intercom again tonight. I can hear her voice through the floor. Not words. A sound. Continuous. I believe what's down there is what I spent my career looking for. The full capacity. All of it. Working. I believe Irina when she says what she's found is real. But it doesn't ask permission. It takes your name and fills the space where you lived with 1,000 strangers. Maybe that's better. I've no way of knowing. But the choice has to remain a choice. And what's in this facility doesn't leave room for choosing. I'm staying because I've been in this building for 7 weeks. Whether I'm clean, I don't know. I haven't spoken to any subject or converted staff member in 26 days, but I've been here, in the same air, hearing them through the walls every night. If I'm compromised, I need to be on this side of the concrete. If I'm not, then someone should be here with them, They were my responsibility when they were prisoners. They're still my responsibility now, whatever they have become. Lev Mikhailovich Orlov, Index 4, October 24, 1978. The engineering team arrived at the hospital basement. They found the welded case with Orlov's note. They followed the delivery instruction. Then they did their job. Structural demolition charges collapsed the stairwell access between the hospital basement and level 1. 40 tons of concrete were poured into the cavity. The hospital wing above was condemned and demolished within 6 months. The site was paved over. A parking structure was built on top of it. Index 4 stopped existing in any official record. The 29 people inside were listed as casualties of a chemical research accident. Families received standard bereavement letters. No bodies were returned. Closed casket protocol. Contamination. The welded case entered military classified storage. It sat in a warehouse for 15 years. When the Soviet Union fell in 1991, it was transferred along with tens of thousands of other classified items to the Russian State Military Archive. It was assigned to a declassification queue. It waited another 32 years. January 2024. Viktor Markov's batch. The tape. He read every document. It took him 2 weeks. He transcribed Orlov's logs, cataloged the personnel files, studied every report. He understood by the end exactly what had happened in Index 4 and exactly why it had been buried. He played the first 5 tapes over the course of those 2 weeks. Orlov's voice, clinical and steady in the early recordings, tighter in the later ones, ambient facility sounds, monitor beeps, equipment noise, nothing harmful, nothing unusual. The 6th tape sat on his desk, red label, "Do not play." But Cheslov had heard it live through the facility's speaker system. In a room next to the subjects, fresh sound, days after they first spoke. This tape was 46 years old. Soviet magnetic tape, stored in a welded steel box for nearly half a century. He could see the oxide flaking on the edge of the reel. The high-frequency response on a tape this degraded would be gone. Whatever the original sound carried, the tonal shifts, the folding structures, they couldn't survive 46 years of magnetic decay. The signal would be mud. He waited until the archive building was empty. A Tuesday night in late January. The heating had shut off at 6 and the room was cold. He could see his breath under the desk lamp. He threaded the tape into the playback unit, a restored Soviet machine the archive kept for this kind of material. The reels clicked twice when they seated. He put on headphones. Pressed play, 10 seconds, maybe less. Human voices, not quite language, syllables that kept folding into each other. I pulled the headphones off and stopped the tape. My hands were shaking. I sat in the dark. I knew the delay, 12 to 20 hours. The archive was silent around me, the tape sitting where I'd left it, spool slightly unwound from where I'd stopped it. I didn't touch it again. By midnight, I was tired. I told myself it was the hour, the cold room, 6 weeks of dead people's files. I put my head down on my arms just for a minute. I woke up at my desk with gray light coming through the windows. I opened my apartment door, heard the kitchen tap dripping, and sat down on the edge of my bed. I closed my eyes. When I woke up, the room was dark. I sat up slowly. I walked to the bathroom and looked at the face in the mirror for a long time. I knew the face. I just didn't know whose it was. It didn't matter. It felt like home. Rex here. Thank you for listening. The fact that you stuck around till the end means a lot. I'm dropping the next one in a couple of days as usual, so make sure to follow. I'll see you in the next one. Good night.